Hey friends, I'm Ash.
I'm Elle.
We are Lovey Cosplay.
This is Shenanigans Cosplayers Say. We are banking episodes, so we have no updates for you. The next, like the first 4-ish are all banked, so we won't really have updates on anything.
There's a lot of stuff we probably would have talked about had we been actively recording at the time, but we weren't.
No. So, all of a sudden down the line at like the 6th or 7th episode, then you might start getting updates on things again. But we're trying to bank right now to make sure that we don't have any disruptions to our schedule.
It's part of our season 5 plan.
For all you wonderful listeners, because frankly, things just happen constantly at this point. So this was our decision was we weren't going to restart the podcast till we could bank. Just because that seemed smart. So at least the first 5 are basically banked. So no updates for you.
And they were not recorded in the order that they appear.
No, they were not recorded in the order that they appear at all.
Nope.
So if things sound a little funny or you're like, but you talked about that, yeah, that's because they're not in order. We aren't recording in order. Speaking of extreme delays, we are finally bringing you the Crown Championship of Cosplay episode. So you may or may not remember that back in April, I competed with Oogie Boogie in the Crown Championships of Cosplay. Ash, what are the Crown Championships of Cosplay?
Let's go down memory lane here for a second.
Let's do it, because it has a long history. It's at least, it's 10 years old now, isn't it?
It is 10 years old now. There have not been 10 contests.
No, but it is 10 years old. Well, pandemic screwed that up, so.
Well, Yep. So the inaugural Crown Championships of Cosplay took place at C2E2 in 2014 and was marketed as the quote-unquote biggest and most prestigious costume contest in the United States. So this was the year after Heroes of Cosplay came out on Sci-Fi. So that like cosplay competition reality TV show. So cosplay was just then kind of starting to become more mainstream. Judges in its first year were Ashley Eckstein, who I hope she's on my bucket list of people that I want to meet someday. A lot of people will know her now from her work with Her Universe. So she does Her Universe designs, fashion shows, and all of that with like Hot Topic at San Diego Comic-Con. Yaya Han, the queen of cosplay, or as she likes to say, the dinosaur of cosplay. So Queen Yaya. And then Nan Cibula Jenkins, who is a costume designer and the head of costume design at the theater school at DePaul University, or at least was at the time. So Crown Championships is a juried solo craftsmanship contest with online submissions and an in-person stage walk at C2E2, which is the Chicago Comics and Entertainment Expo, which featured a $5,000 top prize. The very first 3 contests placed contestants in categories based on the media that their character was from. So anime, comic book, movies, or video games. The first Crown Championships was won by Kyle Mathis as Big Daddy from BioShock, who's been a staple in the Midwestern cosplay community for 20 plus years at this point. So you may also know him as EX Shadow or Turtle Smithy. For the third year, which was the 2015 to 2016 circuit, the competition was expanded to include the United States National Finals, which pitted the Chicago champion against winners at New York Comic Con and Emerald City Comic Con in Seattle for the title of USA champion. And then the USA champion immediately advances to the global championships to face off against champions from around the world. And 2016 included Australia, China, Austria, Singapore, Indonesia, India, and France. Following year, so 2016 to 2017, they updated the rules to be based on one of 4 categories for costume construction techniques: needlework, armor, FX, and larger than life. So larger than life was subsequently removed the following year. And a lot of times you just kind of see like that combined with FX now, I feel.
Yeah, I would say that the larger than life entries do tend to end up in FX at this point.
So then in 2021, it was announced that ReedPop's UK and US international contests, so Euro Cosplay and the Crown Championships of Cosplay, would be merged and rebranded under the Cosplay Central Crown Championships of Cosplay, named after the Cosplay Central feature area common on the show floor for many ReedPop conventions. The performance element from Euro Cosplay was incorporated for the 2021-2022 competition year, with finals moving to MCM London Comic Con in the UK. We talked about a lot of those changes in episode 44 if you want to go back and have a re-listen.
You may remember that in 2020, I did the one and only performance contest at C2E2, and basically that was done as a dry run to see what this potentially could look like for ReedPop for during this change. But you may remember that a lot of that fell apart by the time they got to C2E2. Yes. And there weren't performances by the time you got to C2E2.
Yeah.
In 2021.
Actually, the performance element in its entirety was removed from the global finals, and the venue returned to Chicago for global finals in 2023. So that lasted all of one competition year. I got some stats for you, because who doesn't like them? For the first 7 global finals, so this is 2016 when they were incorporated through 2023. We just finished the Olympics, obviously, recently in the last couple months. It's still 2024, so I can say that. The most gold goes to the USA, which was Alchemical Cosplay in 2018, Cowboy Crunchies in 2019, and Nerds Gone Mild in 2023. Most placement.
And then no, she didn't win the whole thing. Never mind.
And then most placement awards was 6 total for the US, 3 each for South Africa and Australia, and then Austria had 2 placement awards during that time frame. So now that we've gone through our little history lesson, let's talk about you and your experience. I was there as a handler, but obviously it's completely different just kind of being there versus being there.
Right.
So what made you to decide to enter the Crown Championships of Cosplay this year?
So we've thrown Crown around for a long time, as you guys probably remember. But one of the most requested things we've gotten for this show is an episode on the Crown Championships. And I didn't feel that it was appropriate for us to do an episode on this competition without ever having been in the competition. That just didn't seem right to do that. Like, yeah, I could have done an episode on Crown and talked to a lot of people we know, but I felt like in order to fully give you the understanding of what this contest is, one of us had to participate in it. And so I took a look at Oogie. And Oogie ticks a lot of boxes for Crown. And we'll kind of talk about why she ticks the boxes, but why I knew she wasn't going to win, because those are getting in and winning are 2 very different things for Crown. And we will talk about that. But I was like, we go to C2E2 anyway. Why not? So it was really that kind of a situation where I did it more so that we could fully understand Crown and bring this lovely episode to you than actually try to win. Because ultimately she is not what I would take if I was trying to actually win something in Crown. I would do something completely different. Or would have had to sculpt my bugs from scratch and then make molds of them. But we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you talked about Oogie. So obviously costumes for Crown Championships are representing existing or recognizable characters or elements from pop culture, because it is a pop culture and entertainment type exposition show. So that includes, comic books, movies, TV, video games, anime, manga, theater, fantasy. So obviously you picked Oogie Boogie from The Nightmare Before Christmas. Can you give us a little bit more information about that?
Yeah, so there are boxes that you can tick for getting in to Crown. So the goal was in, not win. And Oogie ticks a lot of the boxes for getting in. She's recognizable. You know what this is. People love The Nightmare Before Christmas. It was fan art, which is becoming more and more common in the Crown Championships. It's a very enjoyable costume to look at and to see on stage. And I could put her into FX, which traditionally is the least applied for category. Now, FX brought it for this year. They did. But traditionally, FX is the least applied for category at Crown. So it was my best option if my goal was to get in, which that was the goal.
I like your little in not win. That sounds like a hashtag.
In not win. Yeah, there was no winning. Like that was not the plan was to get in.
So I had mentioned earlier that it is a juried show with an online submission process. So can you tell the audience more about what the submission and selection process kind of looks like?
Yes. So I will state that I do believe this is changing. I think there's going to be more to the application process from what I'm hearing than there has been in previous years. So check and see what New York Comic Con is requesting, because I want to say there have been changes. I haven't had the chance to dig that out yet. But they may or may not now be requesting your work in progress books ahead of time due to some issues with cheating, which there's multiple YouTube videos that I'm not going to direct you to about this because this person doesn't need the attention. But I do believe they may or may not be requiring work in progress books up front, which we'll talk about why I actually think that's a great idea for Crown when we get to judging. The application, honestly, is super easy. You submit, at most, you need to submit a front and back shot of your costume. And then you get one additional image. So what I did is I actually combined a bunch of images into one JPEG so they could see some close-ups of my costume. The more done your costume is, the better chance you have of getting in. You then submit a paragraph that explains the techniques you used to create the costume. You submit your reference for the costume. You submit your MC intro, which the MC intro for this particular contest is meant to, wow the audience, but not necessarily describe your costume. Now, you need to understand that the selection for Crown is not made by the judges. It is made by staff at ReadPop. They may or may not be qualified to decide whether or not somebody's craftsmanship is higher than someone else's. This whole process is meant to wow those selection people, but you are not talking to your judges. So you do also have to make sure that the language you use and the things that you are showing are going to make sense to someone who may not be at that level. But that's why I say that getting in and winning are two very different things for Crown.
So for the past several years, your categories have been needlework, which is costumes constructed primarily through the use of fabric and sewing, stitching, embroidery, etc. Armor, which is costumes constructed primarily by molding, shaping outer layers using acrylic, EVA foam, Worbla, Wonderflex, cardboard, 3D print, etc. And then FX, which is focusing on kind of those less commonly used techniques such as animatronics, optical effects, lighting, mechanical effects, makeup, prosthetics, puppetry, anything that creates kind of a larger than life stilts or exoskeletons to create non-human silhouettes.
Yes. So Oogie qualifies for FX because of the bugs, because of all the painting and weathering and distressing work. The sewing is an afterthought for Oogie. It's not actually important in the grand scheme of things for the costume. Yes, it was important that she was sewn together well and patterned well, but it's not the main focus of the costume. She's predominantly FX based. So that's why I was able to put her in FX.
Yeah. Well, and you had previously submitted a Crown before, which we had talked about back when the podcast first started, but were not selected in that particular year. No. So how did that previous, rejection of not getting in impact your costume selection and your submission strategy for 2024?
I mean, really, it didn't. Harley was an afterthought, so I submitted my No Flutter Harley Quinn one year. She wasn't done. I just threw it. We were going anyway. So I was but I had to submit her in needlework, which is known to be the highest applied for category. So she was not going to get in needlework because she's too simple. Needlework, you got to bring it or you're not getting in because it's literally the category to apply for. I mean, really, but for Oogie, it was FX, which is traditionally the least applied for. It's a little bit more unique. I'm sure there's multiple Harleys that apply every year because it is a Comic-Con. And she just has she's got a gimmick with the glowing without needing electronics is a gimmick, and gimmicks can sometimes also help because it's something fun for the MC to say on stage when you're there. To be like, this costume glows without electronics. Like, because you have to remember that Crown is as much of a contest as it is a show. Crown used to be a TV show on Sci-Fi, like, every year. That's where its roots are from. It's still put together like a show. Will say, though, that I think the selections for Crown are starting to shift. Just noticing what's getting in year after year, that I do think it is starting to do some shifting. So it'll be interesting to see as we go how that starts with the level that people are at now, how that starts to change, and if it does start to have a more heavily craftsmanship focus now that the Cosplay Central is running it, if that focus at submission starts to be like held in a different fashion. And especially if they are going to have you submit build books, which is what I'm hearing, that could also change selection process.
Yeah, a lot of gimmicks. I know a lot of people would complain because there'd be a lot of poorly made larger than life costumes back in the early years. Because
and we still have that issue right now too. I mean, there was that particular costume that shall not be named that cried when they didn't win. Sure. Well, yeah, it looked cool on stage, but it wasn't going to win anything. It wasn't made well enough to win anything, or they didn't do enough to win anything, which is what ultimately Oogie's position is Oogie's a nice costume. Oogie got into Crown. That doesn't mean that Oogie is a highly advanced master's costume. And I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions about Crown, is that everyone who gets into Crown has some extremely highly advanced costume. That is not correct. I can tell you right now, that is not correct about Oogie.
It's it's like any other costume contest, except they put you in a media-based category for construction instead of
it's all based on who applies. And I do see a lot of people being afraid to apply because their costume's not at this super high master's level. It doesn't necessarily need to be if it fits the show. And
if your goal is in and not win.
Right. Yeah. And it's based on who decides to sign up. Like, Oogie could not win this contest. I'm not sure that Oogie can win a regular contest with what people are bringing now, because I would have had to make my bugs from scratch, which we have talked about before. Financially, I couldn't do it. The price tag for that was obscene. But in order for me to have placed in Crown, I would have had to sculpt all my bugs, make molds, and then create the bugs from scratch. That's the only way. Altering these bugs is not enough to actually win something in Crown. I'm not sure that altering these bugs is enough to win anything in a regular contest anymore with what I've been seeing show up at some of these contests. Unless there's a performance element to the awards. Like, I don't know that it is. And I think that that's like a big misconception about this contest. And that's a big misconception about like my costume, because now I'm worried, like, if I try to enter her in another contest, people are going to get mad because she was in Crown. And I'm like, you don't understand. Being in Crown doesn't mean this costume is on this super high pedestal. It's not. Like, I can tell you right now, she is not the best thing I've made. The cleanest, nicest thing I've made, honestly, is Mistress 9. And she is a very simple costume when you look at her. But that costume is clean. Like, she is a harder craftsmanship level than Oogie Boogie. And I just see a lot of stories and stuff of people going, oh, I can't enter Crown, I can't enter Crown. I'm like, yes, you can. Depends on who else enters. So if a ton of really highly advanced masters people all decide to enter in the category you entered, maybe you won't get in then. But they also typically do not like to take duplicates. However, this year had a weird one. But not a duplicate I would have ever expected.
I think with the timing, so the duplicate, you can go back and watch the show. Typically, I don't see duplicates of even characters in different costumes. But there were two people in the Chicago championship that did the Just Breathe dress from Ever After. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that they sold the dress at auction this year.
Oh, it might be. I mean, it might have been.
So there's been hype around the dress again,
Yes.
and it is such a complex dress to make. I'm going to guess that probably was part of the reason why.
I mean, they were both beautiful dresses.
But I was also very surprised.
So usually they don't take duplicates. So like one of my big pieces of advice for anyone who wants to enter Crown is don't pick something super popular. If you pick Belle's yellow dress, there might be a billion other people that also submit Belle's yellow dress. Like, if you want to get in, you may want to pick something that's recognizable, but not super, super, super popular.
Sure. Well, and that was actually going to be my next question is what's your biggest advice for getting into a Crown regional?
I mean, that would be my biggest advice, is trying to find something that isn't going to be... There's not going to be a bunch of duplicates. You want something unique. You're seeing a larger percentage of the Crown entries now being original designs. So you wanted to have something fun about it. You wanted to have something unique about it. You don't necessarily need a popular character to get in. Sarcasm Hime's costume was from a book that nobody knew about, for the most part. Like, I had no idea about this Neil Gaiman book until, she did this costume. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something popular. There were actually quite a few entries that were not super well-known things this past year. I would say my other suggestion would be, yes, the minimum is 60%, but you need to shoot for 90 to 100. Because, like, technically me altering my bugs counted as what they consider making. It's just now things have gotten a little cuckoo bananas and we're making our, like, supplies from scratch. So 90 to 100% is also really arbitrary nowadays because of that situation where people are weaving their own fabric and all that weird chaos. But the more you make of your costume, the better off you're going to be. But my biggest piece of advice, if you want to enter Crown, is be done with your costume when you submit. That is the best way to up your chance at getting in. Because if it's done, they don't have to worry about you dropping out. So, is it done? Would be the number one. Like, if it's not done, still submit, because what's it gonna hurt? I mean, if you're planning on going to C2E2 anyway, it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, that's my advice for anyone who just goes to C2E2. Like, just, if you're going anyway, throw it in there. C2 typically does not sell out of badges. And if they ever do, they'll probably start doing what New York Comic Con does, where I'm pretty sure they reserve a badge for you to pay for Saturday for their contestants. But, like, just throw it in there, because what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to get rejected? Oh no, you can't get in if you don't apply.
I mean, I think there's probably plenty of people that are scared of that. And they'll get their egos hurt a little bit if they don't get in. But again, if you don't try, you never know.
Well, right. And the thing with Crown is you can resubmit things that have won stuff. Like, they don't care if you won Best in Show at whatever convention. They don't, unless it's an international, they don't care.
Yeah.
So if you've got some really nice costume that's won something, you can enter it in Crown.
Yeah. There are very few people in any country that have taken a costume to an international final. So for the majority of people entering, it's a non-issue. Just, if you want to take it, take it.
Right. Like, you can, I know the winner of Fan Expo last year brought her costume to Crown this year. It doesn't matter. There's no expectation of you making upgrades if you've won something. They don't care because it's juried. Like, this is a different type of contest. And I will say, maybe it's a bit of a hot take, but I love that Crown does this. It's a juried contest. There should be no reason you can't enter something that won Best in Show at so-and-so con.
Well, and if they are, self-proclaiming themselves as the most prestigious cosplay contest, in the world, it can only be the most prestigious if every costume is allowed to compete.
Well,
it's not the most prestigious costume contest in the world asterisk, except for people that have won any award at a small con.
Well, right.
Locally.
Well, because this has been, and this I won't go too much on a tangent here because this could be all its own episode, frankly. But we're the only country that does this with not allowing like recompeting and not allowing going from like one international. Like if you win second place in the WCS prelim in the UK, you're still allowed to take that same thing for ICL prelims, but you wouldn't be allowed to do that here. Your entire thing would be done, and I find that very frustrating. If these contests are supposed to be such a higher level above what everything else is, but if you've won an award, you can't enter your costume. And like, you should be able to win Best in Show at so-and-so regional convention and still enter WCS, frankly, because all the other countries allow you to do that. So I think that it's good that this contest is like, look, we are at a higher level. We don't care that you won Best in Show at so-and-so regional convention, because we are jurying this and only selecting like 10 people per category, and this is what it's going to be.
If you want more of the tangent, let us know.
Yes.
I'm sure we could keep
I'm sure
it going
there's
for
a
while.
ton of people that disagree with me, but
I'm all happy about sharing opinions, but
right.
Moving on through our crown process. So that's obviously all before you get there. What is prejudging like at C2E2?
Prejudging. So all in all, you pretty much end up with about 2.5 to 3 minutes for your prejudging. You sort of get a 5-minute slot, but your 5 minutes start the second you walk in the room, and it's a walk from the door to the judges. And so I was kind of in the middle. I wasn't at the beginning of the day, and I wasn't at the end of the day. So I was at the point where they were rushing because they were behind. So I will be perfectly honest, this was not everybody's experience with judging, but mine was not great. And it was not the judge's fault at all. It was just a style of judging situation that wasn't great for me. The judges were extraordinarily qualified. Like, they didn't do anything. And I did think about just saying it was wonderful, but I feel like it's also good for people to know that regardless of how long you've been doing this, you can still have judging situations that don't come out well based on what's going on for you. So Saturday of Crown, I was having one of the worst pain days I've had in like forever. And I had been sick, like, prior to C2E2. And then at that point, I was going through the early parts for my divorce. And I was just super stressed to begin with. I also had not been judged solo ever. And I had not participated in a contest for over a year. I'm used to you walking into the judging room, them allowing you to present yourself and kind of go through your spiel, and that is not what happened when I walked in the room. So I became very flustered and disorganized because I did not get to start how I needed to, because they immediately started asking me questions. Because they had, read the information that I gave with the application, they had looked at the pictures, and instead of me being able to like go head to toe through my costume, they started asking me questions immediately. And so I got very flustered by that process. Part of it was like, I was very grateful to the contest runner asking me if they could turn the lights out when I first walked in so they could see the glowing. But by doing that, then it just started like this bombardment of questions. And I don't do well with having multiple fielding questions from 3 different people while trying to like keep track of what I've said, while trying to go through my work, while only having like less than 3 minutes. So for me, it was very overwhelming. And I became really flustered, and then it kicked in an anxiety attack because when I left that room, I was like, oh my God, they must have thought I was so unprofessional because I couldn't answer these questions quickly. I missed things. I couldn't get through stuff. And I just was like off for the next like hour after that, because I just felt like I did such a horrible job in front of these like extremely qualified people that I respect. And so it was just not good for me. And when I walked out that room, like I knew when I went into the contest that I probably wasn't going to win anything, but walking out feeling like I did that poorly in judging just solidified it for me. And so I just had a really hard time that I had to sit with for a while after that process. But like I said, that was all on me and was going on for me. But I do think it's important for judges, if you ever feel like, now the judges have never said anything to me. I don't think that they actually felt I was unprofessional or haphazard or whatever. I think that was in my head. But as a judge, what it's kind of brought to me is to be more mindful of like jumping in right away, or if someone seems really like flustered and off, it might not be that they're like unprepared. It might be that something else is going on. So, you know, keeping that in mind. But it was a really rough experience for me.
Well, and I think it's one of those things too that, you know, as judges in the past, like we typically go through the tell us about your costume, because we tell people to practice your spiel or your sales pitch for your cosplay. You know, anytime we ever talk about judging, that's something that comes up. And if you have to skip past that, like you said, you're trying to remember what you already said because you don't want to repeat yourself because you have a limited amount of time, but you don't want to forget anything. But then you're having to like try to keep track of these check boxes while they're still asking you questions about things that you hadn't got to yet. Whereas if you were able to go through it, even if they had stopped to interrupt you in each individual space as you were talking about it, then at least it would have still been kind of relevant to what you were talking about and not completely left field. And I think that's kind of important to remember for all contestants, but especially those of us that are neurospicy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, so I did find out that they do look at your build book regardless of whether or not you're going to win or not. They do. Part of the reason the judging time is so short is because they do look at all the build books when they finish. I'm not going to show you my build book because I don't think it reflects what people typically do for Crown. But you can look at like Ganoza Costuming or Nerds Gone Mild or Matthew Berry for like a better Crown style like build book. But I did like that they do actually look at them. Like that was nice because most local contests don't. And they also don't permit you to submit quite as large of a build book as Crown does. For most contests, a build book that's more than like 6 to 8 pages would be completely impractical. But people are turning in like 20 to 30 page build books for Crown, and that's considered normal. Mine was like 10, maybe. Because I was also like missing stuff for, you know, Oogie. Because she's been being made for so long. Like, I'm missing photos and things. But they do set time aside for that. I do think that ultimately, if they're not going to give you more time, which frankly they should give more time, but I understand that they can't, because they also have to do the national, international, like, they have to do all of those. I think that being able to get the build books ahead of time would be super helpful, even though it would be extra work on the judges' point, even if they, you know, looked at them on Friday while they're at the convention. Like, I think it would probably help the process a little bit more, because you've got these just extremely involved costumes and you have less than 5 minutes.
Well, even if they had like a shared Google Drive that was accessible to them after the deadline, I mean, that would be better than nothing.
And, you know, as I mentioned, like, ultimately, this is all on me. It's not on the judges. Like, I was having an extreme amount of social anxiety after Anime Milwaukee. I had all of this stuff going on, like, personally. Like, I was very sensitive to being perceived negatively by the community. So it just was a compounded situation of how I was already feeling like people were seeing me. So then it was like, oh, well, now they must hate me and think I'm horribly unprofessional.
It was not a perfect storm for you.
No, this was like, I almost dropped out multiple times because I was like, I don't think I can handle this right now. I was like, no, you have to do this. Like, you have been wanting to do this forever. You can't let this situation keep you from doing this. But ultimately, I was not in a great mental place.
I think you would have regretted it if you would have.
I think so too. And yes, like the judges did offer, if you submitted, you could get feedback, and I'm sure ultimately it would have been positive, but I chose not to get it. Partly because I don't plan on redoing anything on Oogie, but partially because I just didn't think mentally I could handle it. At the time, especially if it wasn't positive, I just didn't think that my mental health could handle that, so I ultimately chose not to.
Speaking of our judges for 2024 were cosplayer, illustrator, cosplay designer, and Bernina Burnett brand ambassador Desi Desu. Yay! Woohoo! Multimedia artist, filmmaker, TEDx talk host, and published author Samir Tikka Masala. So Samir was the 2017 and 2020 India representative for the global finals. You can find him as a guest contributing author for the Ultimate Cosplay Encyclopedia Volume 1, Armor Up Thermoplastics, by Christopher Talk, Chad Van Wyn, and Sandy Van Wyn, published by C&T Publishing. And we can also throw a link to his TED Talk about cosplay in there for you as well. And also our 2023 Crown Champion, Nerds Gone Mild.
Yes, so obviously very, very qualified judges. Excellent people.
So as somebody that's been adjacent but not actually in the Crown competing community for several years, I've heard talk of the Championship Lounge. What were your thoughts on the Champion Lounge?
The fact that we actually had a room and it wasn't a hallway is a great upgrade. So previous to 2023, I believe, Crown just stuck you in a hallway. There was no room.
Like the hallway?
Like, you just hovered in that, like, space by the elevator. There was no space for you to go to. This year, they had an actual green room where, if you wanted to, you could leave some stuff there. That was, like, by your own discretion. Like, they weren't monitoring it or anything. And I did feel that was ultimately helpful. They had a changing space available in that room. And I do think that was nice to be able to corral people there. But ultimately, you do end up in the hallway. So if you have issues with standing, you need to buy one of those telescoping stools, because you will stand through the duration of the show. Because they do not return you to the green room once you get off stage. They return you to the hallway. And you stay in the hallway until the show ends. Or you leave. Which a lot of people did leave after the Chicago preliminaries were done, because there was also no way for you to watch the show. So even if you would have gone back to the green room, there was no way to watch the show in the green room. Like, you had to pull it up on your phone and watch the live stream. So we were all backstage, like, watching the stream on our phones in the hallway. So if you have difficulties with standing for long periods, you need to bring a telescoping stool. I brought mine. It worked great. There's little to no room in that hallway. So do not expect them to give you a chair, because there's nowhere to put one. So you have to bring something like one of those stools with you. But you will stand in the hallway. It's still how it is. So although we didn't have to stand in the hallway for hours and hours like they previously had to, you are still standing in the hallway for at least the duration of the show.
Yes.
Whether or not they changed that, because I do feel like they could have easily brought people up the elevator after the national awards were done, or the, like, regional awards were done, to the green room. And I do believe I think that is what some people ended up doing. It just wasn't organized in a fashion that you knew that was an option, is my thing. Like, they could very easily have a stream going in that room, and when regionals is done, just take everybody back upstairs, so that they're not crowding in this hallway. Because it really does start to get really crowded when you start bringing in all the international contestants, and, there's a lot of very large costumes, so that start to become a bit much. Overall, the whole, like, green room experience with Crown is great. The contestants are super supportive of each other. There's an Instagram chat that goes back to 2023 now that everybody sits in, and to this day is still posting things constantly in it. Being super supportive about people being in other contests, super supportive of their preparation towards Crown. Like, very, very supportive group of people in general. So I highly
Awesome.
recommend it just for like the quote unquote green room experience, if anything. Yeah.
I'm here for the vibes.
Yeah, definitely for the vibes. I recommend Crown alone for the vibes. Yes.
Sure. So speaking of vibes, what did it feel like actually being on the C2E2 Crown Championship stage?
I mean, it was cool. I apparently did something that was really entertaining. Apparently you don't do entertaining walk-ons during Crown, and I didn't know this. So I performed during my walk-on. I had no idea that's not a thing in Crown, that people just like kind of walk and don't really do anything.
That's boring.
And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. This is the first time I've ever done a contest where I wasn't doing a performance. So I don't know how to do that. So I go on as Oogie Boogie. Like, I creep onto the stage. I, like, scare people. I'm, like, dancing around and being adorable because it's Oogie Boogie but cute. I find out later, after I get off stage, this is not a thing in this contest. Because everybody's like, you were so entertaining. And I'm like, okay. And apparently it's just not a thing.
See, but I think it is a thing. And it totally should be a thing. Because honestly, like, thinking back to the past several Crown Championships, like, there's a lot of times, like, I wouldn't remember necessarily off the top of my head who did what as far as craftsmanship and who won what. But I can tell you that one of my favorite walk-ons I've ever seen in Crown was when Casey Renee did Ariel. Like, it was adorable. And, you know, people talk about that stuff years later.
So, yes, it's one of those things where it's not factored into your score, but it makes for a good show. And I don't know how to go on stage and just walk to 3 places and get off. It was also extraordinarily hard to hear what the MC was saying while on stage, so I didn't even have any idea where they were in my intro. So I'm like, I just have to be up here until he stops talking because I can't understand a word he's saying. And I don't know if that had to do with, like, the way that the speakers were facing or what, but, like, at least me personally, I couldn't understand a word they were saying once I was on stage.
I don't think you're the only person that had that issue because I know a lot of people, I won't even say we're complaining, but a lot of people had mentioned that it seems like some people would just rush off of the stage immediately after their intro was done. And I think part of it is that, you know, a lot of the larger than life and big armor costumes are hard to move in. But also, like, if you have no idea how the flow of everything's going, like, the only thing you really have to go off of is them physically holding the microphones up to their faces. And if they stop doing that and you're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm done. And then you leave.
I mean, yeah, I literally couldn't understand a word he was saying. Didn't know where they were in my intro while I was up there.
You're not the only competitor that I've heard say that.
Because that can sometimes happen with where the speakers are located on a stage. So sometimes if they're located particularly towards the front, a lot of times you can't understand then what is happening while you're physically on stage. Because the sound is being projected away. And with the music being so loud, there's no way to hear the person physically on stage. Because the music was also quite loud. So, and I have auditory processing issues. So to be able to piece out what he was saying with the music behind it was almost nearly impossible for me. So I'm just like bouncing around until he stops talking because I don't know where they're at. Well, and it may also have been his vocal register because my understanding is Yaya was much easier to hear. So it could also just be with the way that they had the mics set up, and with, you know, lower vocal registers can sometimes be harder to hear in that kind of a setup. So,
well, his cadence is definitely different than hers too,
right?
Which could also be a part of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was entertaining. Having no idea what was going on.
Speaking of some time on the stage, one of the additional changes that we've noticed since the rebrand in 2021 is that they no longer will pull all of the contestants from each category onto the stage to do their category awards. So from a competitor's perspective, what do you think about that?
It's hard because, like, I get it. Because I can see it from a contest runner's perspective. So it doesn't bother me when people are pulled for awards, and I know I'm in the minority. With the size of the costumes they had this year, everyone wouldn't fit on stage. And then with the mobility issues that a lot of these costumes have, it would have taken 10 minutes to get everybody on stage. And they don't give a lot of time for Crown. Like, it is tight as far as how much time they give for this contest. So, like, it doesn't bother me, but I know it bothered the majority of the other contestants that they pull. But I personally, with their setup, don't know how else you would do it if you can't fit everybody on stage.
I think another thing, and this also happened, people need to remember that more and more cosplay designs utilized for competitions especially are considered mixed media.
Yes. And
can potentially check more than one category box. So by taking the lineup out of, we're telling everybody when they come on, like, yeah, these are where they were placed by the jury, who are not the judges. By removing the lineup, we're also now kind of allowing our judges a little bit more freedom to appropriately award contestants if they feel that they were placed in the wrong category by the jurors.
Yes.
Which is, really no different than if we're bumping skill categories in like a skill-based contest where you've got novice, journeyman, master. If I have a novice who I think would beat the other journeyman, I bump them to journeyman and then give them the journeyman award. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that is also the reason why they have to pull, because there were multiple moves of costumes from one category to another. So I do think that ultimately, like, you can't bring everybody up if you're going to switch people's categories. And I'm personally fine with judges going, I think this costume fits better in this category than this category.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have any issue with that. It happens all the time now.
It happened at least 2 out of the last 3 years, including 2 Best in Category awards for 2024.
Right. So, and now that they don't do first, second, third in category, like, you're really only going to ever have to do it if that person's winning. Which I know people are also still cranky about not doing first, second, and third in each category, but this is an international contest. You don't normally have that many awards. So, like, for me, it makes sense, but I understand that the people who did Crown for many, many years are bothered by it.
I mean, it was a lot.
But it was a lot of awards for what is a relatively small contest in the grand scheme of things.
I think the first time I read the rules in its entirety, they allowed up to either like 27 or 30 entries. So 9 or 10 per category was kind of the goal.
Right.
That was like their goal for how many they had in. So it was, we'll say 30. And then at that time, they gave out first, second, and third place in each category, which is
9 awards.
Plus first, second, and third place overall for the regional. So you're giving out 12 awards for, let's say, 27 to 30 entries. That's like every 2.5 people gets an award, a placement award at that point.
For what's supposed to be a quote unquote prestigious contest, usually means you have less awards. Like, everybody's not supposed to get an award in a prestigious contest, because I know people are like, well, then we want Judges' Choice Awards. They don't do Judges' Choice Awards in this kind of a contest. Like, that's not a thing in an international contest. You win. There is first, second, and third place in most international contests, and that's it. In some cases, there's first place, and that's it. So, yeah, I don't have a problem with it, but I know that people that have done this for a long time have a problem with it. And I know that there are people who have done this for a long time that have a problem with people being able to switch categories. But my thought process is, well, at some point, this might benefit you, too. Think about it that way, I guess, that at some point you could enter something. Because it's super easy for something to be in armor could also qualify for FX.
Right.
Which are typically the ones that get swapped around because they can be so similar.
Sure.
So it's I don't know. I don't have a problem with it, but I've also been a contest runner, so I kind of see, and a judge, so I kind of see how that can happen.
Well, and ultimately, it's one of those things if I was going to make Zelda from Hyrule Warriors, it's armor and it's sewing.
Right.
And depending on how I were to do the corsetry and structure the skirt on it, there could be some intricate, interesting sewing techniques because of the way that the shirt is actually shaped in the game, which is not usually how I see most people make it. So I could enter, depending on what else is entered in one of those 2 categories, Like, if my work is cleaner and nicer, it could be out one of those. Now, I'm not going to say that that costume is a winning Crown costume, because I don't think it is, regardless of who makes it. But
I mean, it was, because somebody just won with one of those. Well, one with a Zelda.
So, yeah. But that particular costume, I'm just thinking. But it could be. You never know. You know, if I enter an armor, because there's armor involved, but my sewing is better and cleaner and more advanced than the other people in the sewing category, I would win the sewing category. Like, that's how it should work, is that the nicest thing that fits the rules for the category does that. And you're going to get that with mixed media. So we established they don't bring everybody back up on stage for whatever reason. You know, obviously time's an issue. Physical limitations of space is an issue. So for awards, we've talked a little bit like pre-pulling. You want to explain just a little bit more what pre-pulling is?
So if you are more familiar with the Anime Con style contest, they don't typically do pre-pulling, because they typically sit everybody in the audience and everybody gets to watch the contest and they call you up from the audience, right? Well, the bigger and more prestigious the contest, the more space they want to leave for attendees to watch it. So you don't typically get to be in the audience. That typically means you are stuck in some sort of green room. And unless you're super lucky, sometimes your green room is nowhere near where you're actually supposed to be. Like, it might be down a couple hallways. It's not typically connected directly to main stage. Every once in a while you get real lucky.
Yeah. Sometimes you'll only have to go right across like one hall, but most of the time in our experience, you've been taken through service hallways.
Yes.
Around like extra furniture and kitchen
so
gear.
Frequently what happens, which I didn't understand why it didn't happen with Crown, is once you've been on stage, they'll redirect you back to the green room. For most contests, they'll walk you back to the green room. I'm not sure why we were left in the hallway. A suggestion I actually would make for them is to return us after you have pulled everyone, return everybody to the green room, because we all felt a little lost. Nobody really knew what we were supposed to do, and there was really no directions being given as to whether or not, like, well, are we supposed to stay in this hallway, or are we supposed to go back to the green room? Like, what are we supposed to do? It's really cramped and uncomfortable back here. Like,
there's no chairs.
They're trying to get the internationals through, and we can't, like, get out of the way for them. And so most people took that as a hint to, I guess we're supposed to leave. But there was no one directing us in that fashion. So it would be nice if they had someone go, okay, we pulled all the winners, let's go. Because I think that was honestly what people had the bigger problem with than pulling itself. Because the advantage of pulling is if your space is super cramped, or you have to take your contestants back to a green room that isn't located directly there, the only thing you can do is pull your winners. Because waiting for them to get up on stage delays the show. So if you have a very tight time frame, like Crown has for their show, you cannot be waiting around for their names to get announced and then someone calling down the hallway, so-and-so, you need to come up here, and then waiting for them to get up there in their difficult moving costume, and now you've passed 5 to 10 minutes per entry to get them on stage. As a showrunner, it's not practical. I get that people feel like this makes them feel bad. I guess I have a hard time understanding. Maybe I need someone to explain to me why it makes them feel bad. Because it doesn't bother me. But I guess it's because I see the reason for it is probably why. A lot of people feel like it's rude to pull. I get that people want to share the moment with the winner, and I think that the biggest complaint, honestly, that they had was they didn't know that's what the runner was going to do. And I think if people had known that, hey, we're gonna start pulling the winners, so as people walk up the aisle, it means they won something, this particular group would have clapped for them the entire time they walked up the hallway. Like, or silent cheered if they didn't want us to make noise. And I think they were upset primarily because they didn't feel like they got to support their fellow contestants in the way that they wanted to.
Sure.
Like, I ultimately think that's why this bothered this particular group, because legit, the most supportive group of cosplayers I have ever been involved with in 25 years.
The biggest complaints that I heard were people were upset that they didn't get to celebrate them,
Yes.
like you had mentioned. And then the other big complaint I heard was that there was no group photo with everybody in the category.
Which also sucks. Like, that would be nice to have, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, that would be cool to be able to get, like, the whole group together.
I mean, I think if they wanted to remedy that in the future, what they would have to do is they'd have to pull each person on individually and then have them all walk through again before they started the next category. But if we're bumping categories, it still doesn't make any sense to do that.
I get why we weren't able to do it. And why that would be difficult. I get that Crown smashes things into a very tight time frame. I do think that they could improve their communication a bit, because there were also things like challenge coins made for all of us, and half of them didn't get them because they didn't know they were in the green room. We didn't know we could return to the green room. We didn't know we were supposed to return to the green room. You know, we happened to stay backstage for the entirety of the show because we ended up having friends that won stuff. So we stayed with our friend because, you know, and we knew some of the international competitors and things like that. So we stayed backstage, but most of the crew did not. So we ended up finding out there's challenge coins up in the green room, but a lot of people didn't know. And then they had to get sent after the fact because nobody knew about them. So just a little bit more communication about the during show process would be really helpful. I think for the contestants to know, like, beforehand, you're gonna have this green room, you're gonna hang out in the hallway, we're gonna pull the contestants for their awards. Once they're pulled, you are welcome to go back up to the green room. That space is still there for you. I think that would be really helpful to have that clarified, so people know that those options are there. They already can prepare themselves for people being pulled and not getting to go up on stage again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they can mentally prepare for that to be a thing, which I think would have helped a lot, especially for some people that, like, hadn't done Crown before, or, you know, were just very confused by this polling process and what was happening. Like, I'm sitting here going, oh, I know exactly what's going on. And then we have a couple people down the road going, what's happening? And I'm like, they're pulling winners. And they're like, what do you mean? Like, they're pulling the winners up. So these are the people that won. And they're like, what? So I think that having that process explained a little bit more would be very beneficial moving forward. Yeah.
Well, and some people have really bad poker faces, so
yes.
I almost think it's almost like a benefit, because every once in a while you'll be watching a live stream where they do pull all the winners up, and then they'll announce the winners, and then you can just, like, read it on people's faces that they are like, some people don't even try to fake that they're happy for the people that won, and you're just like, oh man, like, if you're one of those people that really has a hard time hiding your emotions, like, it would be a benefit for you to have the pre-polling process, because then you're not going to have that on stage in front of the audience.
Yes, and I do think that, like, 90% of this particular crew would have been able to hold it together, but there were a couple people with, like, very obvious faces when they weren't the ones being pulled through the hallway. So I do think that, particularly for because just because you got in a Crown doesn't mean you're a super experienced competitor either. So I do think for, like, especially your, like, less experienced competitors, it's nice to not force them to be on stage and then have to pretend that they're okay with losing.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's okay to be disappointed, but if you're on stage in front of thousands of people, you've got to watch your face. I think the process overall would have been fine if there just would have been more communication about that choice.
Sure.
I think if people could have prepared themselves for that choice, I think it would have been better received.
Yeah, even if it wasn't printed in the rules, if at the beginning when they, like, did your guys' little brief before they started taking people down the elevator and said, hey, we're going to start doing this, like, I feel like even that would have been beneficial.
A couple weeks before the contest, they actually send you an email with, like, kind of a rundown.
Mm-hmm.
That could have easily just been in that email.
Oh,
You're going to be in the back hallway, and then we're going to pull our contestants. You won't be getting back on stage. Once that's all done, you may return to the green room. If there are spaces out in the audience, you're welcome to go out and watch it, which they did mention. You know, there just wasn't any room because where were you going to go?
Well, I think they really need to keep everybody in one space because you can't pre-pull people if you don't know where they are.
Well, so you had to stay in the hallway. Like, they would need to make it known that you have to stay in the hallway until the winners have been pulled. Then you may return to the green room. And if they just had something streaming it in the green room, everyone would probably just go back up there and watch it.
Yeah. Well, and they could have even let the winners go back up and sit down for a couple of minutes, hypothetically, in the green room, because the people that were in the first category would have been standing for a really long time at that point.
Yeah, I mean, we were towards the end. I mean, I get that trying to run up to where, because that green room is not close, trying to run up to that green room to pull people to come down the elevator to get them on stage would probably not be super reasonable, but they also have an intermission to do it in. Like, I get that, like, what the judges basically have to discuss, because for the most part, they know who's winning what before the show starts. Unless they're going to decide to move someone. If in the end of it they decide, yeah, I think I want to move this person, then it might take them a little bit longer to, like, get down who gets what. It is largely a logistics thing, as to why you can't go back to the green room immediately when you're done. They also don't want the elevator running constantly. So
and breaking.
And breaking. So
and breaking.
I mean, it makes sense that you have to stay in the hallway until it's done. There doesn't seem to be a way to fix the hallway problem. It's terrible. It's full of stuff. Like I said, buy a collapsible stool, because there's no way to fix this problem. But
yeah.
I think if they just clarified things a little bit more, that would help, and had some sort of like screen streaming it in the green room would be great, so you can watch the rest of the show.
So obviously we've been around for a long time. You know, you've brought up 25 years contest and that.
Right.
Been involved in contests for a long time. 25 years. If you could, what is one change that you would make to the way that this contest is run and why?
Well, I think we already talked about that. So.
Well, we did. I mean, talked a little bit about, you know, like a video feed and extra communication.
Yeah, I mean, my big thing would just be more communication. Like, just, if you're going to make those choices, communicate them effectively. Things, because really it was a relatively smooth process.
Yeah.
Overall.
All things considered, yeah.
Like, really wasn't a difficult process or anything. So, yeah, just increase the communication about certain choices.
You've mentioned a couple times that you knew in going ahead of time that you weren't going to win anything.
Well, yeah.
And not win. What made you feel that way?
Well, it's just where people are at now. You know, people are making their base materials. People are making, like, things that, you know, you used to be able to purchase because they weren't considered major parts of the costume. My bugs are a great example. Like, I equate those to being, like, beads or buttons that I altered. Like, they were significantly altered. That's not enough anymore. I need to make the base material. My arm socks and my tights. Normally you wouldn't think of making tights or arm socks yourself, but I would have needed to make those to place. Those things that are like, you know, 5 years ago, you would never even consider making. For even a master's level costume, you now have to make. If you want to place. I don't recommend making shoes, unless you are very experienced in doing so, but like, I dyed my shoes. I didn't build around an existing shoe. So ultimately, there wasn't enough of me making my base materials for me to have placed. There was enough for me to say she's 80-something% made, because in their definition of made, that is correct. In the new definition of what people are doing for these type of contests, it was not enough.
Well, and if we were using Oogie as an example, we would have, you know, of people coming in, and we tell people increase your percentage. You know, if you can do the technique better, the same or better than if you purchase something, take the extra steps. If you can make the pattern at or higher level, then you can purchase a pattern and then alter it. Like, do that, because that's you completing more of it. So in this particular example, if you can make the bugs and the arm socks and the tights and the shoes and that kind of thing at a same or higher level than purchasing base bugs or base shoes or base tights, then if the costumes are otherwise identical, the person that did more is going to be considered higher, like on the pedestal list.
And I mean, this is something that we may explore in a future episode, but the definition of percent made is getting very, very hard to figure out now, because the definition of percent made that a convention gives you and what people are doing are very different. So the definition of percent made that Crown gives you is like, oh, you don't need to make things like your tights or like a bodysuit under your costume or your wig or whatever, but people are making wigs from scratch.
But if you know, like if you have two people that have wigs and one person styled a wig and one person, you know, took netting and actually put their wig together with a needle and hundreds of hours of work and they look identical, the person that made theirs from scratch is considered higher difficulty technique than the person that just styled a wig that they bought out of a bag. What's
getting difficult now is you might, by definition of the contest, be at 90 to 100%, but someone might be doing 100% plus is the thing now. Like, your costume and their costume might be equal of quality, but they weaved their fabric. Well, you know, so it's getting very difficult to calculate that. That percentage it's hard. It's very hard to calculate that percentage. You do kind of have to plan on making everything. Now, if you're going to be in Crown and you want to win.
And that's the caveat. And you want to win.
And you want to win. Yes.
If your goal is getting in, that's one thing. But if you're legitimately wanting to win, that's looking at something else.
Yes, like if you have a very basic wig and you just have to do minor styling, it's not going to count much towards your craftsmanship. Like, even though it says you do not have to make your wig in the definitions, but if your wig is just simple styling, it's probably not going to count for much. If somebody else had to do like their wig from scratch or do a ton of things to it or...
Right, or had to ventilate their own widow's peak or eyebrows or... any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's tough. The percent made thing is very complex nowadays. It's very difficult. I do think that some contests need to add a caveat of this is what we're considering as XYZ. However, please be in mind that people may go further. You know, and then you do start to get in the whole process of like, well, now is it becoming a money game because you need a lot of money to be able to do these supplies from scratch? And yeah, it just starts to snowball.
It snowballs. Well, and I think that also is one of the reasons that I know at least we've talked about, like maybe trying to compete a little bit more casually and try not to be quite so super serious about it whenever we do compete, which is hard because we don't do it very often.
Right.
But like I have hundreds of applique flowers, and there is a dress that I found fan art for that I would love to put my applique flowers on. But I have to know going into it that my base applique flowers were not made from scratch by me. I might paint them, I might embellish them, and obviously I'm going to have to arrange them and design them on the costume. But ultimately, I did not make the applique flowers from scratch.
Right, so they may not be enough if somebody else does that.
They may not be enough if somebody else were to do those things from scratch.
Right, and that's just the thing that we're still working on restructuring the way that we do contest pieces because, you know, 4 years ago that wasn't a requirement and now it is becoming a requirement.
Yeah, even if it's not a rule, just based on the other people that are showing up at the competitions and what they're doing. And I think that's kind of why it's important to kind of research your contest ahead of time.
Yes, you definitely want to research what people are bringing.
If your goal is to win.
Yes.
If your goal is to go for the vibes, then, or to hang out with your friends, or any of the other multiple other reasons to go to a contest besides just winning an award.
Yes.
Then, but if your goal is to win, then keeping those types of thing in mind is important.
Yes. Like, you will hear all about how Kitsune-con was for the vibes, and it was a great choice to go for the vibes, because I was not going to win anything with my craftsmanship on Gekar. That was a speed build. That was not going to win anything.
So ultimately, though, like, did you get what you were hoping to out of this experience with Crown Championships?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a great experience. I enjoyed the experience for the most part. I really enjoyed getting to meet everyone. Everyone was just so like the contestants were just so lovely, and still are. I mean, we have like I mentioned, we have a giant Instagram chat that we're all still in. There will be so many pigeons. There's an entire inside joke with pigeons that evolved. A bunch of us have shirts with a pigeon that one of the Crown participants designed that say, Crown Championship Support Pigeon. It's very silly and it's very joyful. It was nice to be in a group of competitors that were so supportive of each other. Nobody got catty. Nobody got whiny. Everybody was just like, yeah, you won. Awesome. And I haven't had that since ICL prelims, where we all had a dance party in the green room, and the rest
Slumber
of the
party.
Contestants thought we were nuts. But all of the duo groups were just like, yeah, we vibing.
Like a slumber party in the
we
middle
were all
of the
like
room.
we're like, whoever wins, we're fine with this because we all know we're good, and whoever gets it gets it.
We all went down together, like whenever they were going to announce the awards, and we all sat together like in an empty spot in the audience.
That was the vibes for Crown, and I think that was really nice. I had very similar vibes at Kitsune. And that was it was nice to see because you just hear so much complaining after contests. So many butthurt people getting on TikTok whining about losing. And it was really nice to be in a circle with very supportive craftsmen, which reduced a lot of the stress. Also, not having to worry about winning took off a lot of the stress.
Yeah.
Same with Kitsune. Like, I wasn't stressed at all because I was not planning on winning anything.
Sure.
So I was more stressed about whether or not my performance was going to be well received at Kitsune than worrying about actually winning anything. But we'll talk about that later. I think I do worry that, like, at first everybody thought I was a little standoffish, but I was also in a ton of pain. So sorry, friends, if you thought I was really standoffish at Crown. I'm usually much more bubbly and lively, but I was in an insane amount of pain. So yeah, my body hates me. My chronic illness super flared at Crown, and I was in a lot of pain, so it was very unpleasant. But it was nice to be reminded that, like, there are competitor scenes that are super supportive. It did reinvigorate my desire to want to do, like, more contests and be involved in contests again. To be perfectly honest, I'm still a performer at heart, and this not having a performance category thing, it doesn't make me as, like, motivated.
Sure.
Which is probably why you don't see us doing a lot of things locally, because a lot of our local stuff is craftsmanship only.
Yeah. So will you enter Crown at C2 again?
Probably, if anything, for the vibes. Not in 2025.
Well,
because, costume
we
con.
We have another con that weekend, yeah.
It really kind of depends on what happens, because obviously we've had a lot of changes. So, the costume that I have that I would consider like a Crown level could win something costume is not going to be a cheap costume to make. But she is not a good performance costume, because we've tried for years to come up with something and we still can't. She's just not a good performance costume, but she is a lot. And so it would just kind of depend on when she gets finished because I would have to enter in needlework. And so it is harder to casually enter in needlework because it is a very hefty category to even get in. It'll be a shot in the dark because it's not from anything that anyone's going to recognize. So, we'll see. It kind of depends on if we get back on our international train or not as well, and if I need to derail towards, like, one of those projects. Eventually, yes, I probably will if I feel like I have something that is appropriate for Crown. I also have, as I mentioned before, I mentioned the other mother who would be very appropriate for Crown. I just have other plans for her first. So it would be a, well, if not this, then Crown kind of situation for her, because I have other competition plans for her before I would attempt to do Crown with her.
And those competitions care if you go somewhere else first.
Yes.
And Crown does not.
So Crown always ends up being, and then Crown. Not because I feel like Crown is less than, it's because they will accept other things that have won stuff. So if I place second place in an international prelim, Crown doesn't care. I can still use that costume. If I go to a regular convention first, I can still use that costume. But if I want to do NCC, it has to have not won anything, because that's what the rules say. You know, if I were to do Cosplay World Masters, it has to have not won anything, because that's what the rules say. So because Crown has that flexibility, it ends up being and then Crown. So it's not that I think Crown is less than, it's just that they allow you to win something and then go to their competition. So,
all right. So if you have been not paying attention to the internet and you don't know who won,
I know at this point it's like, I'm sure everybody knows, but
we're going to go through the list anyway.
Yes.
So, Elle, you brought this up before, but everybody got a contest challenge coin that was made by Hoku Props. So if you participated and did not get your challenge coin, maybe you should reach out.
Yes.
To Reed Pop and figure out the deals with that. Best in category won a framed custom medal by Hoku Props. Again, they did armor, needlework, and FX. So best armor went to Perlertrix as Boba Fett from Star Wars. Best needlework went to Yeti Kaz as Carlotta Guidicelli as the Duchess from Il Muto from The Phantom of the Opera. That's a mouthful.
Mm-hmm.
Cosplaying as a character in another cosplay, essentially.
Right?
I am in a theater costume of a theater costume.
Right?
Yes. And Best FX went to Say It Ain't So Cosplay as the deity Umberlee from Dungeons and Dragons. Your top 3 overall winners got a cash prize, giant check. Those are always fun.
Mm-hmm.
2 weekend passes for C2E2 2025, and a frame custom medal by Hoku Props. So third place won $250, and that was Siren Cosplay as Magic Armor Link from The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Second place, which was $500, went to Evil Cosplay as Princess Zelda from The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. And first place, which was $1,000, and then moved to Stage 2, the USA National Final, was Lunar Lin as Amidala, Queen of Naboo from Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
So this is the red dress Amidala.
Yeah,
for
like
reference.
Your classic
Yes.
Phantom of the Menace. Classic Phantom Menace dress with the really cool wig and the white face paint. Yeah. Your additional U.S. regional finalists who also blessed our stage. From Florida SuperCon, we had Sunlight of Astora as the Tarnished from Elden Ring. From Emerald City Comic Con, there was Chibling Props as the Azure Star-Lord armor set from Monster Hunter World. And from New York Comic Con, Sarcasm Hime as the Queen from Snow Glass Apples. Which is the
Neil Gaiman.
Neil Gaiman book, yep.
Yep.
So your U.S. national champion moves to Stage 3 and wins an invitation to MCM London Comic Con as a cosplay guest judge. And that went to Sarcasm Hime.
Yes.
Additionally, for our global championship finals from the UK, we had from MCM Birmingham Comic Con, Matthew Berry as Iceborne Leather Armor Hunter from Monster Hunter World. For South Africa, at Comic Con Africa, Jinxie Cosplay as Seraphim from Sakizo's Mystic Animism. Representing Australia from PAX Australia, Kiralee Cosplay as Sunset Dragon's Toph Beifong from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Representing Spain from Japan Weekend Madrid, Hermione Cosplay as Snow White from Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
I believe this was one of the dolls, right?
I don't remember.
I'm not sure.
I don't remember. From Poland, from Magnificon, Rav as Soldier Boy from The Boys. Representing the Baltics, from Unicon Latvia, Yugoro as Ayla the Huntress from The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. So your top 3 overall winners get a cash prize, more giant checks, and a custom medal from Hoku Props. Third place went to Jinxie from South Africa, which was $1,000. Second place, which is $2,000, was Spain, Hermione Cosplay. And first place, which is $5,000 and a custom crown by Hoku Props, along with the bragging rights title of Crown Champion, was Matthew Berry from the UK.
And you
which also means...
remember that Matthew, the previous year, was also in the Crown Championships.
Yeah, that's also true. I did update our stats that we went over at the beginning. So now the UK is currently in second place for most gold. So USA is still at 3, but the UK is now at 2 first place awards. The most placement awards is still the United States, but South Africa moved into second. So they now have 4, and then Australia still has third. And now we have a single most decorated cosplayer, which is Jinxie, because Jinxie, who got third place this year, was our 2020 global champion.
Yes.
So yes.
Yeah.
So congratulations to Matthew and everybody else. You were all stunning in person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So any more questions, comments, concerns about Crown Championships, be sure to let us know. We will address those in an update as needed.
Yes, if there's anything you feel like needs to be clarified, anything that you agree or disagree with that you want us to look into further, we can do that. As stated, we are not the end-all be-all authorities on this contest. This is our particular experience with this contest. So it is always possible that other people have had different experiences than we did.
I like your little disclaimer.
I mean, because somebody's going to come out and be like, that's not how any of this works. And I'm like, well, maybe it doesn't at the one that you go to or in your past experience, but this is just my experience with this.
This is
process.
Elle's specific experience from this specific contest at this specific convention in this specific year. And then a bunch of stuff that I found on the internet by going through archived websites.
Yes.
So,
basically. And information that we have gotten from people that have competed in this contest many years in a row.
Many years. But
yeah.
Anyway. All right. So check that one. Check that box. Woohoo! Again, we are back to our regular every other week programming for you. So we will see you in a couple weeks. But I am Ash.
I'm Elle.
We are Lavi Cosplay.
And this is Shenanigans Cosplayers Say. You've been listening to Shenanigans Cosplayers Say, produced by LVC Productions. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, and YouTube at Lavi Cosplay. Our podcast Instagram is Podcast SCS. Our website is lavicosplay.com. Have a fun, crazy con or cosplay-related story, absurd cosplay question, or just something in general to share with us? Email us at podcastscs@gmail.com or DM us at podcastscs or Lavi Cosplay on Instagram. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening, and remember, just because you can doesn't mean you should.